he was telling him what a great player Paul is. I think, if he stays with me, I'll give him the best opportunity. But, when you talk about the groom, he's also bringing presents for my parents. He bought us our first colour TV. You can imagine that again on an estate where nobody had a colour TV in the mid-70s. So they just thought there was nobody like him, and we know it was the grooming process now, with education and the knowledge, but at the time, we were in a time then of, how do I put this, they used to say children should be seen and not heard, and anything that was abuse would be swept under the carpet. They would try and hide it as though it wasn't happening, just ignore the fact of it. And I'm not saying that my parents knew that was happening, but that was the era that we lived in, and when I look back, when it happened in the familiar home, if it was one of the parents, then the child would be the one that was chastised for maybe lying or telling lies, and it was something that wasn't really heard of.
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then do please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, and please do leave us a review. It really helps make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. Our guest today, Paul Stewart, is a former professional footballer who played for clubs including Spurs, Liverpool and Manchester City. He earned caps for England along the way. But behind the success on the pitch was a devastating secret. As a child, Paul endured years of unimaginable sexual and physical abuse at the hands of a trusted coach, a trauma that followed him into adulthood, leading to addiction, self-destruction and suicidal thoughts. After keeping his abuse secret for more than 40 years, Paul then found the strength to speak out, not just for himself, but for countless others, becoming a leading advocate for safeguarding in sport. He launched the charity SAVE with other former footballers to help the victims of abuse, and later set up the Paul Stewart Official Excellence in Safeguarding, which provides education to organisations including the English Football League. Paul has opened up about the darkest moments of his life, the ongoing journey of recovery and the work he's doing now to ensure no child has to endure what he and others in the sport did. So this is a crisis story of pain, of course, but also of profound courage and ultimately of hope. Paul Stewart, welcome to Crisis What Crisis.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time you're listening in. So,
very good.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that intro. I'm not sure I'm worthy of everything that was said there.
You are, but let's have the discussion, and we'll let the viewers and listeners decide. I've got a funny feeling that they'll agree with me. Paul, it is great to have you with us, but I need to get a fanboy moment out of the way, if that's okay. I am a Spurs fan. May 18th, 1991, FA Cup final. It is your screen backdrop.
It is.
Your goal, your man of the match performance. I'm just going to start by saying thank you.
Thank you.
We don't have many of these moments as Spurs fans.
We don't.
But you delivered one for us.
Long-suffering Spurs fans at the moment.
Paul, you stopped playing in 2000, I think. We'll talk about what was going on in the background, obviously, before and through your career. But those positive memories, the cup final, your England caps, you've talked about the difficulty you have in sort of finding the positives there, because off the field, your life was so impacted by your past. Is that something that is improving over time? I mean, you've got it there as your backdrop on the screen. It's clearly a moment you're proud of. But are you able to extract some joy from those memories?
I think so now. When I look back at the time, it was difficult because, I portrayed a persona that looked like I had everything going for me, looked like I was the happiest one of the happiest guys in the world and living the glamorous, glitzy life of a top footballer. But alone, it was far from the truth. I was struggling inwardly. My family saw it, but those outside just saw this actor who was playing this performance, if you will, and it was very difficult and very tiring. But since 2016, I guess, and the years that have preceded that and followed that, do you know, I talk about my experiences on a daily basis, and it's funny. I was doing an online session for the EFL to a number of clubs on Tuesday. Yeah, on Tuesday. And I realised this year, and I didn't get a chance. I haven't said it when I visit the clubs, but I think that the work that I do within football, especially, has helped me immensely. And I said to them, I have to thank you for that, because I'm not even sure I'd be here telling my story had I not been invited in to do the work that I do, certainly by the EFL. I mean, I do work with organisations outside sport now, but when I look back, I think that it has been a massive help in my journey to recovery. And listen, it never goes away, because you're always impacted by it some way or another, whether that's through family or friends or loved ones. So it never really goes away. I just think that, you know, now for me, it's how I deal with the dark days that you still have. You know, I don't turn to the bottle. I don't turn to drugs in any way. I talk to people. I continue to do the work that I do, which I think has helped me, as I say, immensely in my own road to recovery.
So you hold to that, you know, on one level, simple, but of course, you know, not simple at all. In fact, deeply complicated and complex thought that when those dark moments come, the answer for you is just to fire something positive out.
Yeah.
Is to just get something, you know, positive back out into the world, and that's what your work and that's what your work gives you.
Yeah, and you know, the biggest thing when I'm talking to, and I say this often when I'm delivering my sessions to the children at the academies, and you know, I call them children because all too often we forget, you know, we call them footballers, athletes, sportsmen, sportswomen. And when I'm talking to 16 to 18-year-olds, they're still children. And I often, you know, talk to them about speaking if they've got a problem. I said, look, you know, I start with my sessions, and I show them the stats. You know, nearly 600 games, won a Golden Boot at Manchester City. As you said earlier, alluded to the cup final. I've won 2 championship medals. I've got England caps at every level. And I said, but I wasn't able to enjoy that. There was no enjoyment there for me, because there was nobody for me to talk to with the issues that I had. We have now a network of individuals around clubs, within organisations, that the children can come and talk to. So I put a lot of emphasis on, no matter how big or how small the problem is, come and talk to us. We'll endeavour to try and fix the problem. I'm not guaranteeing you that we'll do it there and then, but we will endeavour and work as hard as we possibly can to sort the problem, because we want you to have the best experience you can possibly have, and it can be a great experience. And imagine, you know, I imagine all the time what it would have been like to come into training every day and just think about the training session, that, you know, with a smile on my face. But, you know, I had that many things going on in my head. I was unable to do that.
So, Paul, let's go to your childhood. Let's go back to the start. You grew up in Manchester on the Wythenshawe estate. Give us a sense of your early childhood. 2 older brothers, I think. Football out in the streets. Football was right in the middle of your life from the get-go, wasn't it?
Yeah. As soon as I could walk, I wanted to play football, and it was a dream. I think it was a dream from everyone that was around that era, around the estate. It was a council estate that we lived on, and I've said many times, you know, we didn't have a lot. My dad was a labourer. He was probably out of work more than he was in work, to be honest. And my mum worked in a factory on a production line, but what we didn't have, we didn't really want for, because we didn't know any difference. I always say we had this love for football, and you'll know that when you're born in Manchester, you're either red or blue. So, you know, half the side of my family were red, half blue, if that can happen, and we just emulate the stars of our favourite team. And we had a patch of grass just outside our house, which was called the Green, but to us it was our Wembley, and we would be on there every minute God sends, you know, until Mum or Dad called us in for our bath or our tea or whatever it was. And do you know what? The early memories, I was just the happiest luckiest child you'd ever wish to meet. You know, I was always teasing my older brothers. I think they got fed up with it sometimes, but you know, my middle brother was a good player as well in his own right, and I used to look at him and see how good he was, and I'd play with like lads their age, you know, with my brother's 3 years older, so it was just initially just a great place to live and grow up. And like I say, you know, what you didn't have, you didn't want for. And you know, I honestly I always had a smile on my face and was extremely happy child.
How old were you when those around you, your parents presumably, and maybe your brothers too, recognised that you had a proper talent?
Well, I think I remember, and I don't know whether you'll remember this, but we used to have a man from the co-op come that my mum paid money to do savings, and she used to get stamps and all that. And I remember, you know, probably about 7 or 8, him asking my dad, "Do you think he's going to make it?" And my dad just went, "Yeah," straight away about me. And I remember that vividly because I ended up meeting him many years later. He moved to Blackpool and bought a guest house, and I met this co-op man many years later in Blackpool at his guest house. And I think you know, I think I always had that dogged determination, if I'm honest, which I think it stemmed more from my mum. You know, I remember one of the things that my mum instilled in us, and it was that there's no such word as can't. You know, if ever we would say in the house, any of us, "I can't do it," or "I can't," whatever, Mum would say there's no such word as can't. And I think that really, you know, stuck with me throughout my my life, and certainly, you know, in the times when I was striving to be a footballer.
And I imagine also, as you were navigating the really dark moments of your life, that those words perhaps still have stayed.
Well, that's when I challenged them. You know, that's when when I had the really dark days. You know, I challenged the saying of my mum was, "There's no such word as can't," because you know the struggles became so difficult that I challenged that expression, but you know I did come through it, and do you know what? A lot of it may have been not just my dogged determination. It may have been those around me that cared for me, that were always there, through the dark times. That probably prevented me from doing anything, really serious.
Paul, there are so many shocking aspects about your story. One of them is just the age you were. I think you were 11 when you first came into contact with your abuser, Frank Roper. I know this is such difficult stuff, but tell us, if you can, how that came to be and how things developed.
Well, I was just short of my 11th birthday, actually, and I was, as I said, I showed good promise as a youngster. I was playing for my school, my town team, county, and trials for England schoolboys. I had everyone in Manchester and the surrounding clubs knocking on the door, wanting me to go to their club, including City and United. And I was playing for the school. Well, my dad used to watch every game that I played, and even when I became a professional football and was lucky enough to play in Europe and travel around Europe, my dad came and watched. So as a youngster, he was always on the touchline, and I was playing for the school one evening, and this coach was wandering up and down the touchline, and he was asking, who the parents of the number 10 were or was. And I was wearing the number 10. But my dad didn't know I'd heard about this coach and the team that he'd run. And I'd heard that it was one of the best teams in Manchester. We used to call it Sunday League football then. Mm-hmm. And moreover, I'd heard about the trips they used to go on in the school holidays to America and to Ireland. Well, I put that into perspective as a family. We'd be really lucky if we went to Blackpool for a day out, and even luckier if we went to Wales in a caravan for a week. So you can imagine how it would have felt like to go to these faraway places that would have been unheard of. And anyway, he approached my dad, said, I think your son's got a really good chance of making it. I run this team. I'm associated with Blackpool Football Club. I'd like him to join. And of course, my dad's first words were, because if there was any more pressure on the household budget, i.e. if we had to pay to play, then he wouldn't have allowed me to play. Because it would have cost money. But this coach just reassured me, Dad, there and then, that it wouldn't cost a penny. So I actually signed what we call registration forms the very next evening. Well, within a matter of days of me signing, this coach is turning up at the house, and he's got the latest pair of football boots. He's got the latest sportswear. And again, to put that into perspective, being the youngest of three, I was on third hand-me-downs when it come to football boots and sportswear. It was, times were really, really that tough. So for someone on our estate to have the latest pair of Adidas boots, the latest sportswear, was just unheard of. And he would be telling me, Mum and Dad, what a good player I was, and I got a great chance of making it. Well, that very quickly transpired into, within about a week, he started turning up at the school gate. And if he didn't give me a lift home, he'd follow me in the car home. If he saw me talking to any of my school colleagues or friends, when I got in the car, he would question why I was talking to them. And I never really thought at that time that, I'm now still this happy-go-lucky kid, because even happier because I've got the latest pair of football boots and sportswear. And he would question why I was talking to them and say to me, I do not want you mixing with children from school. If you're going to be a footballer, you've got to be dedicated. Well, I didn't question it because he was associated with a professional football club. So what he must be telling me must be right.
Aside from the picture that you've painted there, which is grooming, right? Is the obviously the boots, the sportswear, the promises of success. What was the conversation with your parents that he was having?
Well, he was telling them, not just he was telling them what a great player Paul is. I think if he stays with me, I'll give him the best opportunity. But, you know, when you talk about the groom, he's also bringing presents for my parents. You know, he bought us our first colour TV. You know, you can imagine that again on an estate where nobody had a colour TV in the mid-70s. So they just thought there was nobody like him, you know, and we know it was the grooming process now, you know, with education and the knowledge, but at the time, we were in a time then of, how do I put this, you know, they used to say children should be seen and not heard, and anything that was abuse would be swept under the carpet. They would try and hide it as though it wasn't happening, just ignore the fact of it. And I'm not saying that my parents knew that was happening, but that was the era that we lived in, you know, and you know, when I look back, when it happened in the familiar home, you know, if it was one of the parents, then the child would be the one that was chastised for maybe lying or telling lies, and you know, it was something that wasn't really heard of. So,
as you look back on it, Paul, do you think there was anyone in your orbit at that stage, anyone in your life who was suspicious?
I don't think so. Not at that stage. Not at the when we call it the grooming stage. You know, the presents, the gifts. I don't think anyone looked and thought something might transpire here. But it had escalated very quick. It wasn't over months. It was over a matter of weeks. I mean, when he started to come round the house if he wasn't outside the school gates, he was at home when I got home. You know, this is in a matter of a week, 2 weeks. And then during the week, he would take a number of us out. And I mean, I have to put into perspective again that, you know, the team that I played for, five from that team went on to make it as professional footballers. And two of us, myself and David Barsley, went on to play for England. So he had an eye for talent. But he was very, very, very clever with that. And he would take us, how it transpired very quickly, he would take us out during the week to the pictures. He would take us 10-pin bowling, take us to Speedway at Bellevue. But he started dropping me off last and making sexual innuendos and telling dirty jokes and asking me if I'd masturbated the night before. And I remember that. As uncomfortable as it was, he insisted on an answer. You know, he would make sure I answered it. And to get out of the uncomfortable scenario that I was in, I'd just make things up because I didn't really understand what he was asking me at that age anyway. And then...
But you knew it was... But all your instincts were in the right place, in truth, weren't they?
You knew it, yeah, in truth they were, because...
You knew it was wrong, yeah.
The first thing I thought was, do I tell my dad? And then the next thing that comes into my head, well, if I do, my dad will kill him. And then you think about the gifts that he's bringing around for your parents, for your brothers, for your, you know, and you're like, I don't want them to stop getting that. So you convince yourself not to say anything and hope, and this is the truth, I hoped that it wouldn't escalate any further. But then there was the trip to Blackpool after about 3 weeks. He drove us to Blackpool and asked, did anyone drive the car? Does anyone want to drive the car? And there was probably 5 lads in the car. And that's when he first touched me. And I froze. And I actually remember thinking, was it an accident? Because it wasn't an automatic car. But then you start to think about, you know, the dirty jokes and the sexual innuendos. It can't be. By now, I don't know what to do because I feel isolated. Everyone loves this coach. I'm starting to change in my personality because of I'm wary of this coach. But when he's in front of my parents, he's the nicest bloke you'd wish to meet. And that's how it then transpired. Within a week later, he said, we need to do some extra training. Well, My parents just thought it was great having this coach that's associated with a professional club. He's now prepared to take Paul extra training. He's desperate to be a footballer. So they didn't think anything of it. They didn't even notice my sort of change in personality. And the training consisted of being driven to a secluded spot close to my home, whereby I was sexually abused for the first time. And when he finished abusing me, he just whispered in my ear, "You tell your mum and dad or your brothers, I'll kill them." And he said, "If you want to be a footballer, this is what you've got to do." And that's when it went from daily abuse, it was always sexual, but depending on his mood, he would beat me as well. And that's when it was first picked up on by my auntie, because I've gone from this happy-go-lucky young boy that's done a 360 now, and I'm very, very quiet and withdrawn. And my auntie said, she went to my mum and said, "What's up with Paul? He doesn't speak anymore. He doesn't want to come anywhere with us anymore." But he'd ingratiated him so much into the family unit, he was able to convince him that it was, he used to say, it's because he's frightened of not making it. He thinks he's not going to make it. That's why he's quiet. And they didn't have any reason to question it, because I didn't say anything. The physical abuse would all be dependent on his mood. And what I mean by that, if he ever saw that I was integrating with my brothers, or my showing love and affection to my mum and dad, I'd get beaten when I got in the car first. And that's how he drove a wedge between myself and my family and isolated me. And that's the way in which these people operate, or did operate back then. And, I don't think the MO has changed. It's just different ways that they're accessing children today.
Well, I definitely want to talk about that, Paul. But as I'm listening to you here, there's one word that obviously that comes into my mind. I suspect it's in the mind of a lot of people who are listening to or watching this, and and that word is evil. In the way that he was behaving, I don't think manipulative comes close, although obviously that was an element. What word would you apply?
Well, I think what we have to, I know that I understand why you say evil, but as adults they wouldn't recognise that, and this is where we have to heed a warning, because these people are actually the nicest people you could wish to meet. Mm-hmm. The way that they operate, they become the most trusted individual. In fact, to the point where people will go, definitely won't be them that are doing anything. And that's how they manage to do this. So I use the word monster when I escaped his clutches, if you will. I always say I had to escape this monster, and I don't think it's unjust using the word monster, because the way in which they operate, if they were business people, they're probably the best business people in the world, because what they have to manage to be able to isolate an individual and then perpetrate the abuse without that individual speaking up, it doesn't bear thinking about, because
it's a campaign, isn't it? It's a campaign that they run.
It is, yeah, and like I say, they are. We often get this misconception that they're in raincoats and there's, scruffy hair and all this, and they're watching from parks. They're nothing like that. They live, they breathe amongst us, and they're actually, they portray the nicest people in the world, and in some ways it must be tiring for them to put this act on, but it's the end goal, isn't it? It's the end goal for them.
Paul, so many important elements in the story that you're telling us, but that is obviously one of them, and that is the point. I think I work in communications. Words obviously sort of fascinate me. It's what sits behind the question to an extent, and you're right. We apply, too often language that kind of puts it in the realms of something that is unreal. that is, detached from normal life, when in fact they are operating, and that is their MO, right? To operate as much as possible in the normal, in the in the mundane, in the day to day, and so you got to know that to be able to prevent it. Paul, let's continue with the story, if you don't mind. You touched on it there, but this was pretty much every day for 4 years, right? Sexual and physical abuse in the way that you described. He was beating you if you didn't comply. 4 years. Can I just say that again for those watching and listening? 4 years from the age of 11 for pretty much every day of your life.
Yeah.
I first and foremost, I just want to say I'm sorry I am that it happened to you. There's a lot of distance now between that time and where you are now, and the brilliant work that you're doing. But really, I'm so sorry it happened to you. How close did you come over the course of those 4 years? There were moments, I suspect, Paul, where you got very close to telling your dad, telling others, maybe talking to your mum about it, maybe your aunt.
I was frightened too. To be honest, I was frightened too.
You barely spoke for a year, I think. Am I right?
Yeah. I would not instigate a conversation with anyone unless they spoke to me. And when I answered, I would make it as direct as possible for fear of what would happen if he wasn't happy with the answer. Because what you've got to remember is I was with him 24/7. He ended up living in our house. So if I wasn't at school, I was with him in the car. Now, we'd look at that now, and if a child is with an adult 24/7 who is not part of the family or a parent, you would be worried that something isn't quite right. But, I think it's difficult to explain that how clever and manipulative these people are because you would think that my parents would see it as not being right. But I haven't wrote this in the book, and I'm telling you now because God rest his soul, my dad passed away in April. But this monster actually made my mum fall in love with him.
That's how you see it.
Well, I know he did, and I was there when my mum and dad argued over it because he made sure that mum was always around, and I know that my mum fell in love with him. And I've not wrote in the book when my dad was alive because I didn't want to disrespect or upset my dad. And my mum now, while she's alive, she has Alzheimer's and dementia and doesn't really know who I am. So, but it's something that I haven't said for the respect of both my parents, but that's what he did within the family unit.
Goodness, Paul. What stage of your life, there's so much there, but what stage of your life did you realise that? I mean, it was a relationship, was it? They had some form of...
They didn't have that I saw a relationship, but my mum fell in love with him, and he was instrumental in her doing that. And there was a rift between my mum and dad. That's what I saw, and I know it was fact because I came downstairs one evening when my mum and dad were arguing about it. Because I was frightened, and
oh my goodness! And how do you, with everything else that's going on, how do you begin to deal with that as a child? Is another layer of, this podcast is called Crisis. What Crisis? I don't think Crisis comes close, Paul. If I'm honest, Paul, can I ask you from what you just told us? Were you able, and I'm sorry for the loss of your father earlier this year, were you able to sit and have proper conversations with him about all of this before you lost him?
Well, no, because the difficult thing was always the decision to go public with what happened to me, and then to tell, to deliver such devastating news to my parents, who were elderly at the time. My dad was 77, mum 75. What I ended up doing was sort of becoming, and this is why I say to you about abuse. The effects of abuse never really go away, and why I say that is because I became then almost a parent. I had to reassure them constantly that it wasn't their fault. The actual demise in the health of both my mum and dad since 2016 was just dramatic. I saw it visibly. My mum told me about my dad having nightmares, not being able to sleep. When he's asleep, he's fighting in his sleep. But I saw it. I saw the demise in my dad, and I know that my disclosure in 2016 was the start of his ill health. So I managed to spend time with my dad prior to him passing away. I picked him up every Saturday, took him to the bookies because he liked a little bet, and then took him shopping because he was unable to drive. But I saw the demise of my dad, and it was rapid until he passed away. And when I look at it, because I have the regrets of whether it was right to come forward, and I've seen the demise in my mum. We don't have in our family a history of Alzheimer's or dementia. My mum now doesn't even know or recognise who I am. And I look at that pivotal sort of date in November that was possibly the beginning of the end of my parents. Because I know as a parent myself how guilty I would feel, because you instantly feel that you're the protector of your children from the day that they're born, and to think that something like that's happened must have weighed heavily on them. So I constantly was saying to them that it wasn't their fault, because it wasn't their fault. I know it wasn't their fault, but I understand why it affected them. And the same with my older brothers, whilst I don't see them constantly week in, week out, when we do get together, and if ever we sit and we do have a drink, it always comes up that they feel guilty that they didn't protect the youngest brother from what happened. So, that's sometimes when we talk about abuse, we often look at the victim. And don't get me wrong, it is horrendous. But I don't think sometimes we realise the impact on the wider family and loved ones that it really has, and not just the victims. And I think it's important that people do understand that it doesn't, when the abuse stops, it doesn't really stop. You have to find a way as an individual to manage it, but it actually ruins lives of other people as well, which can be devastating.
Paul, I feel like I need to say something on behalf, and I hope I'm right about this, on behalf again of those that might be listening or watching this. But what you described there was a sort of sense of guilt about telling your story, very powerfully. And again, very movingly in relation to your parents. But, I'm going to make a statement of the obvious, but the only person who should be feeling any guilt here, were he still alive, is obviously Frank Roper. And what you've done in telling your story, from 2016 and repeatedly since, is just the most incredibly kind of courageous and positive thing. And forgive me if I'm overstepping the line here, but I can't believe that your parents wouldn't have seen it either, despite the impact on them, of course, in the way that you've described. That what you did was just an incredibly courageous and positive positive
And
thing.
I do it because I've been given a platform as well, because there are so many out there that have suffered like I suffered, but don't have the support that I get from let's be honest, being in the professional football game. So I want to be. I don't want to be just a voice for me. I want to be a voice for those that haven't got a voice, if I'm honest, because I know the struggles that they must be going through. And listen, there are some of my colleagues that were abused that are no longer with us because they struggled with the impact and they weren't able to live with that impact. So, you know, a lot is said about courage and bravery, and you know, and I often look and go, well, you know, I was 52 when I came forward. You know, my abuser, I remember because he was at Blackpool and I was an apprentice, and he walked past me one day and he had a young boy with him. And I knew what was happening to that young boy. And he said, hello. And do you know, I said, hello. I should have gone and said something to somebody. So, you know, I'm doing what I can now to hopefully make up for the opportunities I myself had to stop this monster from being a prolific abuser, which what he was. And you know, and like I say, these are the things that you have to deal with because it's fact, it's regrets, and I'm trying to repair as much as I can with the work that I do for those opportunities that I kept quiet and was you know, almost selfish in my own pursuit of being a footballer.
I don't know what to say really, Paul, because I just think the idea that you're now, all these years later, you know, sitting on a podcast with me, for which thanks, talking about the need to repair. I totally understand what you're saying, and it's but at the same time, all I can think is how do you have, with everything that you've gone through and endured, how is it that you end up having to use the word repair? And that's what these people do, right? That's your point, is that the ripples of this, the sort of waves that keep kind of coming from this. You know, this guy's been, you know, we'll talk about it in a second, but Frank Roper died in 2005. You know, a long time ago, and still you're having to use the word repair for a situation that I think most people would agree was understandable. Though please don't let me sort of diminish what you're saying in any way, shape, or form, because I know you feel it deeply. How did the abuse stop in the end, Paul?
I was just short on my 15th birthday. I'd become this ghost shadow of me, you know, this child. I was just almost non-existent, but having educated myself in the field of safeguarding, doing the courses that are necessary to know and understand what the landscape of safeguarding is, I also understand, as most people understand, is that these people have an age preference when they're attracted to young children. So I was probably becoming too old for him. He was probably looking at his next victim. I'd become more petulant and stronger, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And his usual MO was to reach across and touch me in the car. And this particular day, I thought no more, and I pushed him away, opened the car door, and he slammed on the brakes, and I just ran. I just knew that I needed to get away, and this is when I say from this monster, and I just ran and ran and ran. I don't know to this day the distance, because I don't go back to my familiar home where I was brought up very much, because it holds a lot of pain and heartache. I've been back for the when I wrote the book, which was difficult, but I just needed to get away, and And that was the end of the abuse, both physical and sexual.
In parallel with this, both during your time with Roper and subsequent, of course, you are continuing to perform as a young footballer, and then you get signed. You're at City, later Spurs. You've got this sort of successful, to put it mildly, career, kind of forging ahead at speed. Your England caps, but as I touched on in the intro, the damage that's been done is beginning to show itself in your adult life. Just give us a bit of a sense of that, Paul, if you can.
Yeah, well, I think, when I talk about the football field, that was my safe place. Even when I was a youngster, while the abuse was happening, when I was playing on the football field, nobody could harm me, nobody could touch me, nobody could do anything to me. So for me, it became my safe haven. Also, that will to become a footballer never waned. Even through the abuse, I still wanted to be a footballer. And as I say, for me, it was the only place that I felt was a safe haven from the harm of anybody. Even when I got as playing at Spurs and City and Liverpool, I guess. On the field was my comfort zone. Off the pitch was the struggle, and there was a lot of time off the pitch. There was, you have 90 minutes where for once you can just focus on your opponent, the other team, with no thoughts other than that in your head. The problem I had was what I was doing off the field, and one can't perform on the field to the best of their ability when they're doing such things like that off the field. So, but my mind just wasn't, it's difficult because I thought I'd blocked everything out. I didn't think that everything that was happening was due to what happened to me as a child. I just thought that was my personality, and I was that individual. It was very late on in life that I realised that I was just trying to mask the pain that I was in. I'd be in training and I'd be joking and laughing with the lads, and you would think there was nothing wrong, and then I'd go home and I wouldn't speak to my wife, and if she had friends round, I wouldn't even go in the room. I'd be rude and not talk to them, and not because I wanted to do that. I didn't want to do that, but I just didn't know how to interact properly. I could be the actor and interact, and then once I've got drugs and drink inside me, I can be the nicest and best company you'd wish to have, but that wasn't the real me. That was just the effects of what I'd taken. But my family would see the real Paul in terms of how I was unable to connect, unable to react, unable to show love, affection. I always say, when I talk to people about the impact, I say, it's a parent's God-given right to be able to love, nurture, tell your children that you love them. I've never done that with my children. And another thing, my wife died 4 years ago, and I cared for her 24/7 towards the end. And do you know what? When we talk about, again, regrets, I was still unable to tell her I loved her up until she passed away. She went to her grave without me having the ability to do so. And this is why I do the work that I do and tell my story. And I know it's hard hitting, but people need to know these things and why it's so important that we do as much as we can to stop these people acting. They ruin lives. And they as an individual, And when you've been abused, it takes away all your ability to show love, to show affection, to show emotions. You become just a shell. And that's why I tell the story, because I want people to think, I don't want this to happen. I don't want to see another individual like Paul Stewart standing up in front of us, bearing his soul. And sometimes I get emotion. I show a lot of emotion and get upset, because when I talk about what my family had to endure because of my actions, it hurts. It hurts, and I want the people out there to understand, because we're still in that, certain organisations still think, oh, it won't happen here. It happens over there. It happens next door. It happens to another family. No, that's not how it works. We have to be vigilant. We have to do everything in our powers to keep the children as safe as we can, because the impact that can have is lifelong.
Paul, again, I'm sort of lost for words with the way that you are describing the impact of this. As we started, actually, a way into this call, we had to stop briefly. Those watching this won't know this because it won't be in the edit, because your background that started as a picture of you scoring that amazing goal kept blurring, as they do when we use these backdrops on a Zoom call. It kept blurring into another picture, and there was a baby a picture of a baby kept appearing behind you, and that baby, I think, is your grandchild, your granddaughter.
Yeah.
And so we asked you to move around because that picture kept appearing, and I'm slightly regretting that we did that, because you've just explained to us your inability to sort of actually tell people that you love them. But, and again, I don't wish to be presumptuous here, Paul, and if I'm overstepping the line, you just tell me, but the backdrop that you had, earlier in this call was just a whole bunch of pictures of the people that you love.
Well, they're all Sienna.
They're all Sienna, your granddaughter.
Yeah. When she was a baby, and I'll sorry for interrupting, but I'm going to tell you the truth. I vowed to break the mold with Sienna. So when I see her, I tell her I love her every opportunity I get. I kiss her every opportunity I get, because I don't want her to ever feel the impact, ever notice the impact, because I'm unable to do that. So she's 7 soon, 8 soon. She's 7 now, and every opportunity I get, I tell her that I love her, and I'm going to continue to. And you know what? It's so difficult to do. People wouldn't believe how difficult it is to do, but I vowed to break the mold with Cece, because she's my only granddaughter, and of course she doesn't have grandma or granny as she was. So I just, I want her always to remember Bev.
Paul,
and I always tell her that I love her.
Paul, you talked about Bev there. She was at your side through your career, through the difficulties. We've only scratched the surface, really, of the difficulties of your life as a footballer, the success on the pitch, but the addiction. By the time you get to Liverpool, which was a big move, an amazing opportunity, where things became even more difficult for you, where this damage from the past was still affecting you so deeply. It was Bev who was at your side throughout, an amazing woman.
Incredible.
Clearly. Just tell us a little bit about her, if you can, please.
Well, she was able to do the things I was unable to do. She was the most loving person you'd ever wish to meet, the most amazing mother. You know, I was never there for the children's special birthdays. I was never there at school for them to run into daddy's arms. You know, I was out obliterated on drink and drugs, and sometimes to the extent where they didn't know where I was. But she stood by me. I mean, she did kick me out often, and say that it's over, but we always reconciled, and you know, I think she was a big part of how I am still around. She saw the events that are not pleasant when I've tried to commit suicide, but sorry, to take my own life. I shouldn't use the saying commit suicide, because it isn't right to take my own life. But she was just amazing, and you know, that's another thing that you find difficult. You know, when you believe yourself that you've done so many wrongs, and then you get somebody as pure in the heart as my wife was, and she gets her life taken away. And you know, sometimes that's hard to take. You know, and you know, you do when you lie there, when you're alone. Sometimes you go, you know, the children would have been better. My granddaughter would have been better if it had been me, and Bev would have been here. But the cards have been delivered. I'm doing my best to keep her love and name alive, but make her proud, really, of with the work that I do, because unfortunately she's seen the worst times. She didn't see the best times, and so I do the work in her name and in her vein now.
We should say that you lost Bev 4 years ago. Am I right?
4 years ago.
4 years ago, and she to cancer.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm sorry, Paul, for your loss. Can I ask, at what point did you make the connection then to your past? You know, you described there, which is, you know, it's so important, I think, in this story, that whilst you're behaving in the way that you were behaving, living the life that you're living, a sort of slightly schizophrenic life, you're playing, you know, life to the outside world, to someone like me who was a fan of yours, you know, the perfect life. And yet the truth, of course, as so often is the case in life, very, very different. When did you make the connection then to your past? When did you begin to understand that behaviour was all about the damage that had been caused to you?
Well, what I think probably when I disclosed and went public in 2016, a lot of things happened over a short period of time, and it isn't a quick fix, and you don't understand it all straight away. But you get to meet some incredible people, and then you hear their stories, and you realise that there's so much in parallel with yours, and you then start to think more about what you put away in a Pandora's box. You start to think more about, and you realise that this is the way that these people operate, and that it isn't your fault. You were a victim of the circumstances, and that you then try to put it into some perspective. I don't, because what I don't like doing is making excuses for my behaviour, because nobody pushed my head down and made me take that cocaine. Nobody put the pills down my throat. But what it does, you just start to think more about why you did it, because you were trying to hide something. And then when you meet the incredible people that work in the field, and they the work that they do goes unsung, I think, sometimes, or a lot of the times, and you talk to them, and you start to understand why you took them actions. You took them actions because you're not thinking straight, first and foremost, because what was the best thing for me to do when I was on drugs, when I was coming down, was to get another drug to get back up there. And then you don't have a problem in the world then. That once you hit that euphoria, but then the terrible effects of what it does on the way down, and how you feel, and you get into a perpetual motion of needing to not feel, because you actually end up feeling worse.
Yeah.
And that's when the suicide comes into to mind, because of how low you get. And I think that just talking, understanding yourself, and making yourself, trying to make some self-worth, I think, as well, of yourself, and not all the time feeling like that you're committing a crime because of your actions, because you do, you feel so guilty and guilt-ridden, and I thought in 2016, if maybe I could get 20 years of solace from coming forward. That was the gamble that I wanted to take. If I could get 20 years of solace by coming forward, then I'll take that. I didn't know at the time that it would lead me into the work that I do. And I look at it this way, and this is true. With the work that I do, if I save one child from not just going through what I went through. And I often say this, the abuse, whilst it was horrendous, wasn't the worst for me. It was actually the impact that it's had on my adult life, and those, the impact that my actions have had on those loved ones around me. What it did to me through my adult life has been far worse for me than the abuse itself, and I think that's because of my actions, and how it's affected those really close to me.
Just give me a sense on how you're feeling about the environment right now, in which you are doing so much brilliant work. Are you feeling broadly positive? Do you feel that we have really made significant steps forward, or are you less optimistic?
No, I think significant steps forward. Certainly, when you look at the elite realm of football, because they have the infrastructure, they have the funding to be able to have a safeguarding team within the clubs. I think the further down the pyramid you go, it's much more difficult and much more dangerous, because you're asking volunteers to do a job, and these volunteers would normally have a job as well as then being as a welfare officer at a grassroots club. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And when you go out of football as well, when you look at some of the other sports that don't have the funding that football has, then it's very difficult for them to implement what needs to be implemented, as hard as they do try. But I've seen an awful lot of great work go on. These people are still out there. We know that there isn't a cure. We know that only 2% of them get convicted. Those that get convicted, they get segregated with like-minded individuals. They sit all day and they talk about what they did on the outside. So when they're ready for release, they're ready to offend again. They're using social media whereby when I was being abused, these individuals had to groom not just your mum and dad, but your aunties and uncles and your grandparents. And, they had to groom a whole network to isolate you. Now we're looking at a world where these individuals will change their appearance. They'll go on social media. They will make contact. And I think, again, the statistics say within 6 weeks is physical contact. So what we need to do in an ever-changing world is make sure that we are still continuing to find ways to prevent these people from accessing their children, because What people don't understand is they are working twice as hard as us to try and access the children because there isn't a cure for them. There isn't a cure. So, I look back at when the internet first came out. Now you've got Facebook and all these different social medias. We could have used them as an education tool. What they've become is an absolute minefield for these people to operate in, and it's very dangerous. So your work, I don't think ever stops. And I think the day that you think you've got it right is the day you're at your most vulnerable as well, because these people are, I said to you from the onset, I think if there were business people, the way that they operate, they'd be the best business people in the world. But no, their thoughts are to access children. So we need to understand that, we always have to be looking at ways to prevent them from accessing our children.
I know you've told, elements of this story before. You wrote a brilliant book, and I would urge anyone to get out. It is available, actually, still. Get out. It's published in 2016, Damaged, My Story. Get out there and read it, please. But I just want to say thank you, Paul. I want to say thank you for your time. I want to say thank you for your eloquence, and I know you don't hold to the word brave or courageous, but I'm sorry, I'm going to use it or use those words, and I'm just going to thank you for sharing this story, because I just think from whatever angle you're sort of walking into this conversation from, if you like, whether you're someone who works in sport, whether you're someone who perhaps, please God, you haven't had to endure anything close to what you've endured, or perhaps maybe you're at risk of that. And we've got some, young people who listen to this podcast. If you're, someone perhaps who's come out at the other end of that and is trying to make sense of their lives, then I think you just got so much to offer, Paul, with what you're saying. And
thank you so much.
And just thank you so much for sharing it with us. If you've enjoyed this conversation, then please do leave us a review. And if you found it helpful or even inspiring, we would be delighted if you recommended us to your friends. It means an awful lot if you do. You can watch the full episodes on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and if you hit subscribe, you'll find a lot more crisis conversations. As always, full transcripts are available on our website, along with links. Just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com, and thank you so much for listening.